On April 13th, 2014, Hunter Biden sent an email to his business partner at Burisma, Devon Archer. Now, he sent this a week before his father, the vice president, flew to Ukraine to meet with Ukraine's prime minister. In the email, Hunter Biden composed a detailed memo with nearly 24 data points about the political and strategic situation on the ground in Ukraine. What's so immediately striking, and Miranda Devine pointed this out, having read the entire laptop, is that this email bears no resemblance to anything else we have that Hunter Biden has ever written. In fact, it sounded like something produced by the State Department. There's no question that Hunter Biden used classified materials to assemble this email. Listen carefully. Quote, "The strategic value is to create a land bridge for RU to Crimea," he writes at one point. Notice he uses the diplomatic abbreviation for Russia, RU, because he's in the know.
So, the will of the Blob, very interesting. Maybe we should rewrite some documents with that. So we the Blob, right, would be the correct writing.
Don't jinx it. We might have a new constitution soon that just straight up says it.
Woohoo. So the will of the Blob is something that is protecting the Bidens. This really does kind of set everything in really stark relief here, because that's why the Bidens don't get investigated for their foreign dealings, because they were acting as cutouts for this apparatus and engaging in this grand orchestrated foreign policy to break up Russia and to secure natural resources. Is that correct?
Yes, and remember, it's the State Department. The CIA is the dirty arm of the State Department. And so the CIA is dirty, but it's the dirty arm. It's the gangrene arm. The gangrene rotted brain of it is state, the evil mega mind brain of it. And I know there's a meme, people say I look like that guy, but in a bad way. But what I'm saying is, Joe Biden himself was the chairman or ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for 15 years before he became vice president running Obama's foreign policy on Eastern Europe. And he was on that committee for 40 years. 40 years oversight of the State Department was done by Joe Biden. And again, whenever you hear State Department, that means the CIA and DOD, because both of those equities filter into, but we'll just stick with CIA. He's the oversight of state, the underbelly of which is the CIA. It's the sort of kissing cousin of the Senate Intelligence Committee. It's an intelligence job. Joe Biden spent 40 years of intelligence oversight. The CIA's big brother was being overseen by Joe Biden. He is Mr. Blob. The Council on Foreign Relations called him, quote, Mr. Foreign Policy. And I will just remind folks of this. Joe Biden, early in his career, when he was in his 30s, said in front of a camera that he considered himself to be akin to a prostitute because of the favors that he would have to do to outside stakeholders in order to win re-election. And he was Mr. Foreign Policy on the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Who was he prostituting for? That tells you his own words. I mean, 1 + 1 is 2. The guy said he's a sellout. His job is foreign policy. He's selling out to the foreign policy establishment. He's doing the dirty work. And he puts his friggin' son as his bagman to carry out those activities. And then the CIA turns around and protects the bagman from the Justice Department.
And we've seen that. That's been completely reported out. That the CIA is saying, can't touch this, can't touch this guy, can't touch this guy. The guy who makes all these mysterious payments on behalf of Hunter Biden, can't touch him, can't investigate him. And we're blocking it. And speaking of blocking, Mike, you brought up something that, so again, shocks the conscience. So we have these phone calls and the last hours of Joe Biden as vice president, when typically you'd be taking photos with your grandchildren, at least the ones that you acknowledge, and you'd be writing beautiful letters or maybe a poem about your time as vice president. And Joe Biden did something very strange. He began calling Poroshenko in this series of rabid phone calls, dictating certain banks be closed, talking about how we need to get this place ship shape before Trump becomes sophisticated enough to figure out what's going on here. I just want to play this really short clip here because you're making this contention in the last answer that the entire Blob apparatus stopped Trump from learning things. And this seems to be possibly the best piece of evidence to prove that you are right. Here we go.
Getting very, very close. What I don't want to have happen, I don't want Trump to get in a position where he thinks he's about to buy onto a policy where the financial system is going to collapse and he's going to be looked to pour more money into Ukraine. That's how he'll think about it before he gets sophisticated enough to know the details. So anything you can do to push the Privat Bank to closure so that the IMF loan comes forward, I would respectfully suggest is critically important to your economic as well as physical security.
So it's like physically threatening the security of a foreign leader. But besides that, why is Joe Biden like sweatily and quite frantically muscling in on Ukraine policy? And these are in the last hours of Joe Biden as vice president. These phone calls are made.
Yeah, because if Trump were to learn the truth of how corrupt Ukraine was, how what a economic disaster it was, then the policy that Trump already was running on effectively on a fundamental renegotiation of our stance with Russia and basically reversing the 2014 to 2016 Obama policies on Ukraine-Russia policy. Then if it looked like it was a losing proposition, or if it looked like the money was being squandered, Privat Bank was a giant money laundering cesspool. They were basically taking the IMF money and just kicking it to their own warlords. By the way, these sort of these Ukrainian oligarchs, happen to be some of the biggest donors to the Blob. Viktor Pinchuk, for example, the Ukrainian oligarch, was the single largest donor to the Clinton Global Foundation, and actually started together with Joe Biden and Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the three of them. Joe Biden, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who was the head of NATO from 2009 to 2014, the first 5 years of the Obama administration, until the Crimea annexation. So Joe Biden personally in 2018, who at that point was not even a politician, he was a post vice president, hadn't even declared he was running yet. He, the head of NATO, and the Ukrainian oligarch Viktor Pinchuk started something called the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity, which was basically a giant censorship coalition spanning stakeholders in the U.S. and NATO in order to stop the election of right-wing populist parties in NATO, who themselves were running on restoring relations with Russia. Because remember, a big part of Obama's policy from 2014 to 2016, Biden's policy from 2014 to 2016, was sanctioning Russia over the Crimea annexation. They forced half of Russia to cut off their own leg and to cut off, the gas deals that they were having with Russia, to sanction them as punishment for providing military support for Crimea breaking away from Ukraine to join the Russian Federation. And so I also find that really interesting, that clip about the IMF bank closure, moving forward the IMF loan, because the IMF is effectively George Soros. I mean, he's kind of the battering ram of the International Monetary Fund, which is one of these sort of gangster organizations that operates like a mafia, where they provide you protection essentially in the form of a high interest rate short-term loan when you are economically unstable, and then as collateral for repayment, it's all of your infrastructure, all of your natural resources, all of your publicly held state wealth. And at the time that this clip was being played, the IMF was effectively seeking to have as moving forward that loan would effectively force Ukraine to divest and sell off to NATO stakeholders these state-held assets, especially some company called Naftogaz, which is the state-owned Ukrainian gas company that the State Department and CIA were basically planning to build up as Ukraine's version of Gazprom, where it had made its money as gas transits from Russia. But if Burisma could mine enough of the endogenous shale in Ukraine, both in the Donbass and in the Black Sea, then they could build up a supply at Naftogaz to sort of rival Gazprom. So Burisma was sort of the feeder arm to Naftogaz. Burisma was Hunter Biden and Cofer Black from the CIA. And Naftogaz was George Soros. George Soros has been in a, quote, tug of war with Vladimir Putin for control of Naftogaz for almost 30 years now. And the IMF deal, if they don't pay the IMF money, that essentially gets sold off in a fire sale. And in fact, that process is already underway.